Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. That's right, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is in Washington, D.C. right now, meeting with President Joe Biden and in a trilateral meeting with also the Prime Minister of Japan. So they're up to some shady business, no doubt. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the context for what's happening in Asia-Pacific right now.
Okay, y'all, just a little history too. It has been 125 years since the Filipino-American War, which means that it's been 125 years since there was a genocide in the Philippines caused by the United States. It has been 25 years since the Visiting Forces Act and 10 years since the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. These military agreements are with the United States, and we are trying to track how the United States has a presence in the Philippines and how it is actually detrimental to the Filipino people. So just a little context about what is happening at the Trilateral Summit. According to the United States government, the leaders, both Marcos from the Philippines and Prime Minister Kishida from Japan, are, get this, the leaders will advance a trilateral partnership built on deep historical ties of friendship, robust and growing economic relations, and a proud and resolute commitment to shared democratic values and a shared vision for free and open Indo-Pacific. Is that actually true? No! The U.S. is also saying that President Biden will host President Marcos for a meeting at the White House on April 11th, the second time there, to review the historic momentum in U.S.-Philippines relations and discuss efforts to expand cooperation, get this, cooperation on economic security, clean energy, people-to-people ties, and human rights and democracy. Is that true, y'all? Biden will reaffirm the ironclad alliance between the United States and the Philippines and emphasize the U.S.'s commitment to upholding international law and promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific. I think this meeting is BS. We know it's not true. So also, on behalf of the Philippine government, we have a guy that some of you are familiar with, Jose Romualdez. Do we like him? No. He is the ambassador to the United States, and he also, a while back, penned an article to terror tag myself and other Gabriela members across the nation. Coward. He wrote an article to say that we were terrorists. And is activism terrorism? No. I agree. What Romualdez also said, he actually described today's trilateral meetings as possibly one of the most momentous events in our history. You know, not the genocide 125 years ago, but this is a momentous history right here. This is as the U.S. and Japan have pledged at least $100 billion for energy, infrastructure, defense, and security to the Philippines. They say they're going to talk about semiconductor industry, energy, part of clean energy products. They also want to talk about the defense and modernization of defense during this meeting. They want to talk about, these leaders are saying they're going to talk about enhancements in the economic sphere, but to whose benefit, right? To whose benefit? And then also they want to talk about a bill or a bipartisan bill to provide Manila with $2.5 billion worth of aid to boost its defenses against Chinese aggression in the West Philippine Sea. These are all the things that are on the topic of agenda for this trilateral meeting, and this is what they're trying to sell to the masses. But what we actually know is that every year, the U.S. launches more and larger war games in the Philippines, on the land, on sovereign territories, and the immediate surrounding waters of the Philippines, all over the Philippines. Concurrently, it builds increasing numbers of military bases, outposts, and facilities that serve as quarters for troops and storage of equipment, weapons, war vehicles, so forth. So what we're looking at is that actually they are not going to be talking about this. They're going to be actually talking about U.S. intervention and U.S. military weapons in the Philippines. The U.S. current use of the armed forces of the Philippines, so not just the Philippine government, but the U.S.'s use of the armed forces of the Philippines and Marcos as a puppet regime. They are using them as pawns for the armed conflict of the war against China. And it is actually a threat, a very big threat to the sovereignty and livelihood of all Filipinos in the land, right?
Yeah!
What we're also seeing is, well actually, here's the thing. The Communist Party of the Philippines and the National Democratic Movement is saying we must firmly lead and unite the entire Filipino people to defend the country's rights against foreign military intrusion and promote the desire for peace and demand a peaceful foreign policy, which is very opposite of what is happening on April 11th. Also, the Communist Party says they are demand a peaceful foreign policy and prevent the outbreak of the inter-imperialist war that will implicate the Philippines. And this is what it's really about. Who is going to be suffering between the war between U.S. and China? The Philippines. Also, something that one of the war games that are happening is Cope Thunder Air Force, happening now, April 8th through the 19th. And what they're saying is that they're insisting they're not meant to target any current threats, that it's just a war game, it's practice, that China, they're trying to tell China, the U.S. is trying to tell China, yo, you need to relax, don't worry, these war games are not to threaten you, we're not targeting you, but they're also saying that this is a deterrence of threats. They're saying that actually doing these war games in the Philippines is a way to deter threats from China, right? So the second iteration of this will also be happening in June. So we're seeing the complete and actual true agenda and what the U.S. is intending to do in the Philippines.
Yeah, so thank you. Really important introduction and understanding the current situation, right? Cope Thunder, these Air Force war games are happening right now. One thing that we know that has happened, actually, this is the 39th year of Balikatan Exercises, which are some of the biggest war games in the Philippines, led by the United States. They're actually saying this year, they're boasting, this will be the biggest Balikatan Exercises in the 39-year history. Last year was also the biggest Balikatan Exercises in the 38-year history. Last year, there were 17,000 troops involved in the Balikatan Exercises. Of those 17,000, 12,000 were U.S. troops on Philippine sovereign territory and in Philippine sovereign waters, right? 5,000 Filipinos and 100 Australians. This year, they're also bringing in France, so a key European U.S. ally. What France has to do in Asia-Pacific, I'm still not quite clear on, other than supporting the United States as their, the ruling imperialist power. Anyway, sorry. Trying to rush through this. I'll be honest, 20 minutes doesn't feel like a lot of time. But what I do want to give is a little bit of background, actually a case study from Balikatan last year. Last year, in the province of Batanes, which is the northernmost province, only about 200 nautical miles away from Taiwan, the island of Batan actually ran out of rice. The island of Batan ran out of rice in April of last year when residents went on a panic buying spree because they knew that U.S. troops were coming and would be swarming the entire island. They already know, the people of Batan, they already know that this is provocation of China, right? And the general sentiment across the island of Batan is, we don't want this here. We don't want any part of this conflict because we know that we're stuck in the middle, right? The province continued to experience this horrible unrest throughout the Balikatan exercises when thousands of troopers, hundreds of ships and aircrafts, cannons and other weapons all arrived on the island of Bataan. There were beach landings, simulated beach landings, U.S. amphibious warships on the coast, and the landing of these huge, noisy aircraft called Ospreys, and the firing of really loud, deafening artillery.
The picture we're really trying to paint is all of this is put under a guise that, you know, the U.S. is not trying to fight China. These are just war games. But really, how the Philippines is also trying to put it as, or sell it to the people, is that it's about defense, right? U.S. military in the Philippines is about defending land, that the U.S. military actually would defend the people if there was ever a war between the U.S. and China. This comes at the Philippine government through the Department of National Defense. They started a comprehensive archipelagic defense concept, which supposedly aims to protect the Philippines' exclusive economic zone in Palawan, where actually American and Chinese ships are ever present, and also in Batanes, with a case study that Sam talked about, where the U.S. plans to build permanent bases because of its proximity to Taiwan. So you're starting to see the actual motivating factor. But in fact, the CADC is a continuation of the U.S.'s so-called archipelagic defense strategy. Archipelagic, yeah, that's very hard. Which has pushed for the deployment of missiles and cannon systems into what is called the first island chain. So this strategy is touted as a way to prevent the expansion of the threat of Chinese military power. But behind this strategy, like every strategy by the U.S. government, it is giving the U.S. mainland a deep defense when war breaks out between it and China. This is the country in the first island chain, which will mainly bear the devastation that a U.S.-China war will bring should it break out. So what we're actually seeing is not a defense at all. It is actually using the Filipino people and the Filipino land as a defense mechanism for a war that will break out between the U.S. and China.
Yeah. So, in September of last year, September 2023, the U.S. announced that it's going to build more EDCA bases. EDCA, again, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which says that the U.S. can station troops on Philippine military bases. So, they're going from 5 to 9, right? They're going from 5 bases to 9 bases. And actually, there's one senator who said it's actually going to be up to 16. And just today, I heard an interview with an activist in the Philippines who said it's actually looking more like 22. So within a year, they will go from 5 to 9 to 16 to possibly 22 military bases, which are technically Philippines military bases, but have U.S. troops stationed at them, U.S. material stored there, stockpiled there. And so, yeah. There will be an increase in U.S. military presence throughout the Philippines. Another case study from Ilocos Norte, which is in the northern part of the Philippines. When the U.S. launched military drills there in March of last year, it involved some civilians in the barangay. So there's actually a quote from a civilian in the barangay who said, during the training, we had to lift American soldiers who pretended to be war casualties. And so they're actually saying that this means during a real war, we'll be expected to participate. So not only do civilians have to be bystanders who will potentially be harmed in any situation where there is war between the US and China, but actually they will be expected to participate and help wounded soldiers, right? There is another quote from a resident of Ilocos Norte who said, who's actually a fisherman, and they were not able to actually fish for 7 days of simulation and live fire exercises in the waters near Ilocos Norte. He said, our situation is precarious. What if we are at sea and then their rockets suddenly start firing? So we can see this is another example of civilians, the Filipino people, being put directly in the crossfire between the U.S. and China in this inter-imperialist conflict.
So part of the U.S.'s hold on the Philippines is from lopsided foreign agreements that the U.S. uses to maintain control of the Philippines. I think we've named some already, but we want to also highlight that the last time Marcos was here, which is why we're trying to make some noise and make sure he knows he's not welcome in the United States. But the last time that Marcos was here, him and Joe Biden, that guy, signed the bilateral defense guideline, a document that actually reaffirmed the mutual defense treaty. So this has been going on forever. And the Mutual Defense Treaty was signed in 1951. It is a colonial agreement that bound the Philippines to U.S. foreign policy. This is repeated over and over again through the history between the U.S. and the Philippines, and yet they have the audacity to say that during this meeting that they're having on April 11th, that we're actually going to reaffirm our great friendship between one another. Isn't that bullshit? Is that bullshit? They're having a fake meeting, y'all. So the history of it continues from 1974, where there were military bases agreement, but then the mass movement in the Philippines were able to reject this agreement, or were able to convince the Philippine Senate to reject this agreement. But then now the U.S. has found different ways to make more agreements within the Philippines, including the Visiting Forces Agreement, which allows the unrestrained movement and presence of large numbers of American troops and granting them territorial rights. So I saw a sign, Justice for Jennifer Laude. Her murderer, Joseph Scott Pemberton, U.S. Navyman Joseph Scott Pemberton, actually was, because of the VFA, was actually, what's it called? What's the word that you were using? He was pardoned. Yes, thank you. He was pardoned from, after being, what is it? The words are missing. He murdered someone and he was pardoned after that by both the U.S. and Filipino government, and right now he's not serving any of his sentence, even though it was very blatantly known that he murdered our trans sister, Jennifer Laude. So under the VFA, you're seeing that U.S. military are getting away with all types of crap. You're also seeing that under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, this authorizes the construction of exclusive U.S. military facilities, like what Sam was saying. And that means that more and more there's a basis for building military bases wherever the U.S. wants in that country. So the U.S. has a free-for-all in the Philippines.
Yeah, so the AFP, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, has said over and over again that they are focused on external defense and they will be abandoning counterinsurgency. This runs counter to everything that they're saying. If folks don't know, there is a civil war happening in the Philippines. And the Armed Forces of the Philippines has the majority of its battalions deployed to the countryside where there are New People's Army guerrilla fronts, right? The Armed Forces of the Philippines General Browner, the AFP commander, has actually said that, well, last month he said that we would destroy all the NPA guerrilla fronts by the end of March. There's still more than 110 guerrilla fronts throughout the Philippines. Yes. And he also said, well, we're actually going to crush the armed revolution by the end of this year. But of course, anywhere where there is the kind of oppression that the Filipino people face, there will continue to be resistance. This version of crushing the armed revolution actually looks like indiscriminate bombings, campaigns of indiscriminate bombings throughout the countryside. So artillery shelling, aerial strafing from machine guns. These are just some of the widespread violations of international humanitarian law that the Armed Forces of the Philippines are carrying out on a day-to-day basis, especially in the Philippine countryside. Thanks, y'all. We were just checking in because we're a little short on time, which is not surprising to me. But we want to get everybody up moving, agitated, hype, ready to chant, ready to hear some more speeches, ready to yell, ready to show the Marcos regime, the Biden regime, all the imperialists, all the fascists, that they are not welcome anywhere the people are, right? That's right. Okay, so we just wanted to give a little bit of political education to really ground us in why we're here and what we're up against. Because it's not going to be easy, right? Just like cramming a 20-page document into 20 minutes of teaching is not easy.
Okay, so in the context of what is happening between the U.S. and China, we just want to give a little insight from BAYAN, a revolutionary newspaper that is saying that it is not far-fetched, especially with the U.S. President Biden desperate to show off in the run-up to the November elections, so keep this in mind, but the offensive actions of the United States and its allies against China will lead to the armed confrontations by the end of the year. So not only are we seeing that the U.S. and the Philippines wants to stomp out the revolutionary movement by the end of the year, but we're also seeing the U.S. really instigate and provoke a war between itself and China by the end of the year. And we have to keep track of this as folks living in this country, and what are the real intentions of this government.
So, why is the U.S. instigation of war in Asia a threat to Filipino lives and sovereignty? What do y'all think? Somebody shout it out. Why is the U.S. instigation of war in China a threat to the lives of the Filipino people and the sovereignty of the Filipino people? Say again? They're in the crosshairs, right? It denies the right of Filipinos to have an independent foreign policy. Right? The construction of U.S. military bases as part of the preparations for the U.S. theater of war against China is a direct violation of the Philippines' right to self-determination. The U.S.'s use of the AFP as a support force in military aggression is further undermining the country's sovereignty. It robs the Filipino people of the right to decide if participating in a war pushed by the U.S. is in accordance with the national interests and wishes of the Filipino people. So, there's just a few reasons, but yes, it puts the Filipino people directly in the crosshairs of an imperialist conflict.
So we are grateful for everyone showing up today to say no to Marcos, no to the U.S. Marcos regime. We're excited to actually hear from our next speakers who will tell us what our goal is today, and what our goal is every day as we yell U.S. out of everywhere, but specifically U.S. out of the Philippines. So we're going to invite up our next... Okay. We're not going to invite. Oh, there's going to be a song. Okay. Then as our musicians are coming up, we just want to remind y'all some of the tasks that we have to take up in the movement in the United States. The Filipinos, we have to unite the Filipino people under the flag of patriotism and mobilize the people to stand up and resist and defend the life and sovereignty of our motherland, of our country. We have to take seriously and unleash the powerful movement that is anti-imperialist and against imperialist wars. We have to unleash this movement. We also, if we do not do this, if not, the country will likely be sucked up in the whirlwind of the inter-imperialist war, ushering the country into a new chapter of the national suffering, and we do not want that for the Filipino people.
That's right. So unleash the powerful movement that is anti-imperialist and against imperialist wars. This includes also, for those of us who are non-Filipino, uniting non-Filipinos in support of the Filipino people's movement. especially who are non-Filipino, I'm calling on y'all, we must be loud in our support of the Filipino people's mass movement, demanding an end to U.S. security assistance to the Philippines and all U.S. troops and military infrastructure out of the Philippines. We must also be loud in our support and solidarity for the armed struggle of the Filipino people against the U.S.-backed or current puppet government of the Philippines. So with that, I think we can pass it off to our cultural. So one chant as they're coming up, the Philippines is not for sale. The Philippines is not for sale.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Let's get ready to get our energy on. So excited to welcome our cultural group that is coming here today. All of you should have gotten copies of the lyrics by our flyers so that you can sing along, jam along, however you would like. They'll be singing a song called BFA Blues. So yeah, I'll pass the mic off to our